Pretty soon after she was arrested, the word got around the Montgomery community, and there was a spontaneous reaction. I think I could say safely that more than 99% of the Negro people of Montgomery rose up with a bit of indignation, a righteous indignation, I would say. And this led to the bus boycott. The Negro citizens decided not to ride the buses until these conditions were changed. They asked me to serve as a spokesman and the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and from this time, I found myself in a leadership position in the civil rights struggle.
And the bus boycott was, of course, a startling success under your leadership.
Yes, we struggled for 381 days, but at the end of that, we returned to thoroughly integrated buses, and they are integrated today in Montgomery.
Now, what does this position of leadership cost you in personal terms? I mean, are you threatened? Do you get anonymous letters? You have had violence, I think, shown to you more than once. Tell us a little what is involved in all that.
Yes, I have been threatened many, many times. There was a time that we received as many as 30 and 40 threatening calls a day. And of course, I received numerous threatening letters. My secretary has come to the point now that she doesn't show me most of these letters, but occasionally I come across them. Within the last few days, I remember receiving a threatening letter. And they say such things as this: you are causing too much trouble in this town, and if you aren't out within 10 days, you and your family will be killed. Now, in Montgomery, our home was bombed twice, and I guess these were the most severe instances of violence that we confronted. But even today, we still confront threats through telephone calls and through the mail.
Have you found that the police have been diligent in protecting you, as diligent as they would be with a white leader?
Well, in Montgomery, Alabama, they were not. Certainly, we got no protection from the law enforcement agencies. In fact, one of the big problems that we confront in some situations in the South is that many of the mobs and the hoodlums are aided and abetted by some of the policemen. But I must say that this is a little different in Atlanta, Georgia. When we have received threats, when we have had crosses burned on our lawn by the Ku Klux Klan, the policemen have been very diligent in attempting to protect us, so that situations do vary even in the Deep South.
You were once the victim of an actual assassination attempt, were you not?
Yes.
What happened?
Well, this was in Harlem. It turned out to be a demented Negro woman, and she happens to be in an institution even at this hour for the criminally insane. I was autographing books in a bookstore in Harlem in New York City, and this was a book, Stride Toward Freedom, that I wrote a few years ago. And she came in, I was writing, and I heard someone say, "Are you Reverend King?" And I didn't hardly look up, I just said yes. And by that time, she leaned over and stabbed me. And of course, it was a near fatal stabbing. I was in the hospital for several weeks as a result of this.
But this was not actually, I mean, since the woman was demented, this was not strictly relevant to your campaign.
No, I don't think it could be included in events that took place as a result, totally as a result of my work in the civil rights area. And yet I don't think it can be totally divorced, because if I hadn't been involved in this, she wouldn't have even known me. So that in some way it was connected, but not totally.
Have you, during this period, which must have been one of very great strain for you, have you felt frightened and even very lonely in your position of leadership?
Yes, at times. I think honesty impels me to admit that there have been those times that I actually confronted fear. I don't think anyone in a situation like this can go through it without confronting moments of real fear. But I have always had something that gave me an inner sense of assurance and an inner sense of security in the final analysis, even in the moments of loneliness. Something ultimately came to remind me that in this struggle, because it is basically right, because it is a thrust forward to achieve something not just for Negro people, but something that will save the whole of mankind. And when I have come to see these things, I always felt a sense of cosmic companionship, so that the loneliness and the fear have faded away because of a greater feeling of security, because of commitment to a moral ideal.
Does that carry you as far as feeling total confidence in yourself? For instance, for better or worse, you've become the symbol now of Negro emancipation in the southern states. Now, are you an adequate symbol? Do you feel that you're adequate?
Well, again, I must confess that there are those moments when I feel a sense of inadequacy as a symbol. It is never easy for one to accept the role of symbolism without going through constant moments of self-examination. And I must confess that there are moments when I begin to wonder whether I am adequate, or whether I'm able to face all of the challenges and even the responsibilities of this particular position.
Have you always found that you've been able to keep your wife and children with you, or have you ever felt it necessary to send them away for safety?
There have been times that I have had to send them away for safety, particularly when we were in the state of Alabama. But my wife happens to be one of those very strong persons, and one who is very concerned about this whole matter and very dedicated. And I can remember moments when I sent her away for safety. I would look up a few days later and she was back home because she wanted to be there.
Dr. King, clearly you're making progress in this. Now, could you make more progress if your demonstrations were based on more direct action, on strikes, for instance, on a more direct economic threat, in the way that some of the African people struggling for independence have tried to shape their destinies?
Well, I do feel that nonviolent direct action is a most powerful approach in seeking to bring about racial justice. Now, to a degree, we have moved in this area. The Montgomery bus boycott was a limited move in this area. The sit-ins that have engulfed the whole South over the last few months would be another move in this direction. This is nonviolent direct action. Also, the freedom rides. I think all of these things are certainly serving to speed up the process. And I think the more we delve deeper into these particular areas, the more we will be able to bring about at least a speedier solution to the problem.
Some of your critics do say that you lack fire. I've heard that said about you, that you're not really keen on challenging except on the margins of this problem. Now, I expect that's unfair, but I'd like to hear your answer to it.
Well, I don't know if I lack fire. I do feel that at times I am rather soft and maybe a little gentle, but on the other hand, I have strongly advocated direct action. I have made it clear that I believe this is one of the most potent weapons available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom and human dignity. So that I don't consider this a marginal approach. I consider this as an approach going to the very depths. I have participated in sit-ins myself. I have been arrested as a result of my participating in sit-ins with the students at lunch counters. I served as one of the coordinators of the Freedom Rides, so that I don't think it is true to say that I am not in accord with these particular methods. I believe in them, and I have advocated them and participated in them.
I understand exactly why you believe in nonviolence, but have you found it easy to persuade your followers that nonviolence is really the best method? I mean, there must be a great temptation to take a poke back at a white man who hits you.
That is true, that it is difficult at times to convince people that this is the best way. And I guess it is difficult for all of us not to retaliate. But on the whole, I have been amazed at the tremendous response that we have gained when we have called for nonviolent action. I look back over Montgomery and think of the fact that for all of these days, 381 days, more than 99 and 9/10% of the Negro citizens participated in the boycott. They confronted harassing experiences, they confronted physical violence, and never did they retaliate with a single act of physical violence. And the same is true of the student sit-in movement, which included thousands of students. Not a single, well, I would say very few, retaliated with physical violence. So that even though it is difficult, I think we have been able to get this method over in a most significant way.
Dr. King, apart from the business of discrimination, are you a radical in other causes? Do you follow the other great radical political causes in the world or not?
Well, I'm not sure what cause you
are you concerned, for instance, with let's say, the abolishing of nuclear weapons?
Oh, yes. I have worked very closely with this particular approach. I have worked with an organization for sane nuclear policy in the United States, and I am a strong believer in disarmament and suspension of nuclear tests, and some methods being used to arouse the conscience of mankind on this most important issue. As I've said so often, I don't think the choice is any longer between violence and nonviolence in a day when guided ballistic missiles are carving highways of death through the stratosphere. I think now it is a choice between nonviolence and non-existence, so that I have strongly endorsed organizations that are fighting or struggling in a creative, nonviolent way to arouse the conscience of mankind on this issue.
Well, now let me put to you a last question. You could live and work in many parts of the world where you'd be discriminated against much less than you are in the United States. You are, I suspect, a patriotic American citizen, and you probably don't propose to live anywhere but the United States. Now, will you tell me why?
Well, I can only say that the United States is home for me. I was born there, and in spite of its shortcomings, naturally there are things in the United States that I love and people that I love. I think we have a great tradition ideally. The Democratic Creed is a marvelous one. And my work is simply an attempt to say to America that you have a marvelous ideal and you should live up to it. And so when the students sit down at lunch counters and I have decided to join with them, I felt that we were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream, and certainly the best in the dream of all mankind for peace and brotherhood. So I live there with the feeling that we are moving in the right direction, and with the feeling that this problem can be solved in the United States if enough people give themselves to it, if they devote their lives to breaking down all of the barriers that separate men from men on the basis of race or color.